This week on Technado, we're talking with Joe Garcia from CyberArk. We're also going to look at some news stories, including some people eavesdropping on you, as well as a power struggle between Apple, Facebook, and Google. That's all coming up on Technado, starting right now. Hello and welcome to Technado. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, and I'm joined, as always, by Don Pizzette. Don, how you doing today?
I am doing well, as always.
And I don't know if you noticed, Don, but there's somebody else here. I should
Interloper.
mention. Yeah. So normally we do our interviews remote, but we let Joe know, the time for the interview, and he said, "I'll just come. I'll just drive and hit the road and be up there to see you guys." So, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, you guys are conveniently located off of 75, and so is my house. So I figured, come on down and check out the studios and sit in for a bit.
And now, Joe, I asked you your title beforehand, and I had to write it down because it's that kind of title.
Yeah.
So you are the Strategic Enablement DevOps Security. Now, that's not even a title because there's not like officer or director or something at the end, but you're the Strategic Enablement DevOps Security person at CyberArk.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
So essentially my role is to kind of outreach into the community, but also in our internal community as well, our own sales engineers, our own customer success internally, and to try and drive home the idea of DevOps security. There's something that is something that CyberArk as a whole is really targeting for 2019. We'll get into it more, I'm sure, later on in the show. But we definitely see that there needs to be focus in getting security up to speed with DevOps teams that are very agile instead of trying to keep with the old ways of dealing with security that could be a little cumbersome.
Yeah, and we thought since you're here, we'll just have you in and get your feedback on the news as we go through. But definitely, we're going to find out more about CyberArk later in the show and what it is you do there and you guys are coming up with. But let's get to news because we have a lot of good news articles this week. There's the first one. Some of you may have found out the hard way about this one, but there was a major iPhone FaceTime bug that lets you hear the audio of the person you're calling even before they pick up. This story on 9to5mac.com. So, Don, you're back on an iPhone now, right?
Yeah, I'm on an iPhone.
All right, so were you caught by this one, or did you catch anyone else?
I mean, technically, I'm caught by it, just like everybody who had FaceTime turned on.
Yeah.
So the what it basically boiled down to was if you had an iPhone, iPad, or a Mac, because this worked on the desktop as well, a Mac OS, basically any device where you were logged into FaceTime, an attacker could place a call, so it could call your number, and while it's dialing, they could then turn it into a group call and add another caller, and if they call themselves, then it would immediately start the group call, which would enable audio for the original person they were calling, party A or whatever. So it would start audio even though the other person hadn't picked up their phone, which meant basically you could eavesdrop on somebody else's iPhone. And when this first broke, it was a big deal. Like, people were really panicking. It didn't take long before people started to realize that it is a little bit limited. So the way the attack works is you're able to listen to the audio on the remote device while the phone is ringing. When it stops ringing, if you don't answer, then they lose the audio. So you can't just like fire up somebody's phone and then listen for hours on end, which I'm sure would be entertaining. Instead, you get to listen for however long it rings. Now, on an iPhone, that's about 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. On a Mac, it's much longer. It rings for like 40 seconds. But still, we're talking about less than a minute of audio. And in theory, you could sit there and call over and over and over again, assuming the person on the other end was ignoring the rings and not looking at it going, why do I keep getting calls from somebody?
Yeah. So basically all you're hearing is the person going, I'm not answering this call from this jerk.
Yeah, I can't believe that jerk Peter's calling again.
I knew it. But there was nothing with the cameras. You weren't seeing.
Well, that's what I thought at first, but it came out that the cameras are actually involved.
Okay.
It's a slightly different scenario during the attack. So let's say I call you and you don't answer.
Someday, I hope.
Right? And then I add myself in for the group call.
Okay.
And so the phone is ringing, and now I can hear you. If you press the power button on your iPhone, then at that point, it would enable your camera and your audio coming to me, and it would enable my audio going to you for whatever reason. Like, power button is supposed to ignore
it'll mute it, yeah. So
supposed to. But in this case, it would actually start sending your information to me. So, if you've have your phone in your pocket, the camera's not really going to do a whole lot of good. But if it's sitting there on the table, then the camera would activate at that point. So camera or video and audio are involved in this.
So this is something that was just recognized now, or it's been since the last update where they kind of rolled out these changes to the group FaceTime?
I haven't tested on older devices, mostly because Apple is so forceful about getting new versions of the iOS out, right? They tout that in a lot of their releases, like, oh, over 70% of our phones running the latest iOS. So it's hard to find older phones to test on. But they're saying that it's affecting all devices running iOS 12.1 or later, which makes me think this is a part of one of the newer updates, that the older ones are probably not affected. And then if it's 12.1 or later, just whenever 12.1 was rolled out, this was a part of it. Now, evidence has started popping out where people had actually tweeted and sent messages. There was one tweet in particular that was like #TimCook over a week ago, telling them about this issue. And Apple really hasn't done a good job responding to this when they basically said, oh, yeah, we'll put a fix out later that'll fix that.
That's the typical channel for reporting a bug, too, right? You just tweet to the CEO.
Well, yeah. I mean, the CEO's always monitoring Twitter, right?
I think so, yeah. So you have an iPhone, too? You said you actually played with this?
So my wife and I didn't. Our experience was a little bit different than what you were talking about. Our experience was when I tested it out with her, I was able to add myself onto the group call. And then what ended up happening from her side of the phone was that it would just basically freeze at that point where you can kind of see the video camera, your face, and for the other person in the corner, it was black. And it would freeze. And as long as she wasn't declining the call or trying to monkey it all on the touch screen, then it would let me have the audio. And I actually got it over 20 seconds. I had a conversation with my brother that I woke up in Puerto Rico. He's on work. And I was trying it out, being a good security researcher and all. Let's see how many people I can get with this. And woke him up and had maybe a 5-minute conversation with him before he finally, hung up the phone.
So the interesting part there is you weren't just hearing him. He was able to actually hear you,
Yeah, we were talking back and forth and having an actual conversation. Now, the video, I could never get it to work, although I didn't try that power button trick either. I didn't know about that. I was a little worried about turning on video at past 11 o'clock at night when this came out, and I found out about it. But it was definitely a lot of fun to play with, and then it eventually becomes like, oh my gosh, how do I stop this from happening to me?
Exactly.
Yeah, the power button was one technique. Apparently, there's a few others. The 9 to 5 Mac article referenced a few other ways. Here's one that says like. If you join the call using an invitation on another device, then that would trigger the video as well. This came from Jusassin. That's got to be the coolest Twitter handle ever. And so he posted that. So anyhow, a number of ways of exploiting this. What I thought was interesting is I know a IT security incident is significant when my mom sends me a message about it. And I got a message from my mom on this one. And so I was like, oh, great, this is a big deal. So
I found out from my 10-year-old daughter. He texted me, don't answer FaceTimes, Dad.
Well, don't answering is the problem, right?
Yeah, it's like, okay, well.
I believe it was a 14-year-old who initially found the bug, and,
wow.
and they recorded a video. His mother or whatever recorded a video of it. That's the report that I read on CNN.com.
Who else is using group FaceTime?
I know, well, not me. I mean, I used it to try and drop in to my brother in Puerto Rico.
Exactly.
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't really a big issue because, I don't really use FaceTime, so just disable FaceTime, problem solved.
Yeah, and it says that's what Apple has done. They've taken group FaceTime offline in an attempt to address this, and that's at the time we're recording this, what 9 to 5 Mac has. So, it could be resolved probably by the time you're watching this podcast. Hopefully, I imagine they'll be pretty quick to something like this because it's a pretty big black eye if they leave it hanging out there for a while.
I'm curious how they're going to fix this because it seems like this would be a problem in the iOS, not like a server-side problem. And so if they push out an update, let's say 12.2 comes out, it's got a patch in there for this, right? But if somebody doesn't update their phone and they stay on 12.1, and because Apple is actively discouraging us to update now by making each update a little buggier than the previous one. So if somebody stays on 12.1, are they still going to have that vulnerability when?
Or maybe you just have group FaceTime unavailable to you if you're in that session. Or I don't know if they can make that open to certain OSs and not others, but. We'll see, I guess.
I've honestly, prior to this, I've never used group FaceTime. So now the only time I've used it was to simulate this bug.
What I really wonder is how the effects will come in from like the privacy law side of it, and the EU and things like that, who have these very particular privacy laws that could have been violated by utilizing this bug in those areas too, not just so much in America, but like Germany, for example, right? You have to let the other person know before you start recording that you're recording them. That's
well, even
not
in
happening
Florida.
here.
I mean, Florida with
Yeah,
the sunshine laws
true.
for journalism and things, you have to get permission for audio and video recording.
Right.
So.
Well, but this isn't
But you're not
necessarily
recording.
recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though you, well, yeah, okay.
This would be more like eavesdropping,
Yeah.
right?
You have to get permission for eavesdropping.
Illegal wiretapping.
Yeah. Excuse me, may I eavesdrop on you, please?
Well, I mean, unless you have like, what is it, the FISMA warrant?
FISA.
FISA.
Yeah. You can just do whatever you want.
Yeah, maybe Apple's got one and we just don't know. Speaking of people that listen to your conversations, let's jump right to our next story over on ZDNet.
Let's go to Russia.
Yeah, unsecured MongoDB databases expose Kremlin's backdoor into Russian businesses. So, yeah, we've known obviously that they pretty much make you put a backdoor in anything that's coming out of there so they can get into it. But now we all have access to those backdoors as well.
So I've made some comments on the podcast in the past that weren't necessarily the most popular. I try and be factual, but I've said things like in the Soviet, not Soviet Union, but in Russia. Sorry, I'll date myself here. In the USSR, let me tell you what's going on. So in Russia, they actually have laws that say if you use encryption, you have to provide the private keys to the government. So we know that they actually have government-mandated backdoors in many, many systems. And I've also commented on how MongoDB is horrible for security. The default install is just riddled with insecurity, and the developers themselves, they put it right in the documentation, like, this should never be exposed to the internet. I mean, it basically says that in the README for MongoDB. And so you've got to actively get involved in securing it. And the problem is with DevOps these days, people just rifle it out there and it ends up exposed. And that's exactly what happened here, except it's a double whammy that a exposed MongoDB allowed a security researcher to poke into it and find the Kremlin's backdoor credentials, which they could then go and use to access all of these other exposed Mongo databases. And so it's tons and tons of data from Soviet businesses, company. I keep saying Soviet. The Russian. Yeah, it's not 1987.
No, it's not. You've watched a lot of those 80s movies, though, where they're the villains and everything.
I know.
So.
Well, you grow up watching Red Dawn. And
That's Soviet.
The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So anyhow, when you mix these two things together, right, hard-coded backdoor credentials that are the same across hundreds of databases, and a database that's just not designed to be exposed to the internet, you end up with a situation where tons of private data is now being exposed on the internet, and it's a big, big deal. So, my call to action here is, first off, if you're using MongoDB, please, please, please do not expose it to the internet. Even the developers don't want you doing that. It needs to be locked away behind a firewall. Only your web front end should be allowed to access it, and even that should be secured through some kind of application gateway. This should not be something exposed to the outside. And then, if you find you have a user account for admin@kremlin.ru, then that's your backdoor account.
Yeah, like they were really trying hard to hide the fact that they had backdoor access, right?
That was really the most surprising thing about this article, like admin@kremlin.ru.
I know, like, could you be any more,
Vladimir
conspicuous?
at Kremlin. But hopefully they have like LastPass and they can easily now go update all their passwords on everything. Every company.
They're running security checks right now through LastPass as we speak.
Yeah, so
Makes you wonder.
well, this is one of those security stories where luckily there's nothing for us to do except go poke around and.
Well, I mean, we could pretend that this isn't a problem in the U.S. as well, I guess, but it is.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's not the Kremlin doing it.
Well, no, I was going to say at least it's not like in the law. We're doing it at least.
Well, that's true. It's in our secret laws.
Secretly, yeah, as government should. But yeah, this is why I guess you need to be careful if you're using.
You need to be proactive about your legal backdoors.
Yeah, what is the Kaspersky or any of those?
Yeah, well, you first off, you need to identify that not every system you deploy is suitable to be exposed to the internet. Really, that's a big part of this. That sure, the Kremlin needed backdoors, and maybe you need to give the Kremlin the ability to VPN into your network to access systems to stay in compliance with the law, right? I'm not saying that that's necessarily right or wrong. That's just that those are the laws. You got to follow them. But by leaving your database exposed to the internet, even credentialed, once those backdoor credentials get compromised, now people have access. And there have been some big vendors over the years. Cisco like 5 times in the last 5 years. Fortinet is another one where they had support credentials that were hard coded into their firewall products. That those got out, and once an attacker had those, they could compromise your firewall, which is one of the worst things that can happen. So, and here we are talking about credential management.
I know.
We're going to talk more about CyberArk later on, but
yeah.
you deal with this every day, right?
Yeah, we do, but we take a different approach to it than most other companies do, and because we're protecting what we call the heart of the enterprise, which is like those privileged accounts and secrets, we already assume breach. So we assume that your firewalls aren't going to withstand the test of time, or the Russians, or whoever, and that one day you're going to have to worry about an external threat actor inside of your network, and how are we going to combat against that? So we take it a little step further. Instead of just saying, hey, the firewalls are good for the perimeter, we want to make sure that even if your perimeter goes down, the keys to the castle are still fortified.
Well, I think you need to reach out to your salespeople, because the Russian government would be an amazing client for you to have. Obviously thousands of credentials need to be managed here.
Yes.
Or just one credential 1,000 times, it sounds like. Which is even the crazier part to me. All right. Speaking of, again, people listening to us, that's a theme this week. Facebook. They're always watching. So this is a leaked memo, and we have this on Business Insider here. Facebook is scrambling to do damage control with pissed employees after Apple blocks its internal apps. So this one was kind of confusing to me a little bit. So we're not talking about like the Facebook app that you or I would use on our phones, but we're talking about internal apps that Facebook employees are using, but that are existing within the Apple App Store.
Yeah. So in the iOS, unlike other platforms like Android, you can install applications from wherever you want. If you trust the application yourself, you can install it. It won't stop you. It might warn you, but it won't stop you. iOS, on the other hand, you're allowed to install apps from the iOS App Store, and that's it, right? But there is actually a path that if you're an enterprise, or even if you're just a bored individual with $100, you can sign up for a developer account, and you can issue a enterprise certificate and a security profile. And when you install that security profile on a phone, it allows you to install apps that are signed by your enterprise cert. And then you can create internal applications just for your business, and you can distribute them on your company iPhones and iPads, and they'll be trusted. They're not in the App Store, but you didn't have to jailbreak your phone to do it. And a lot of vendors use this for testing, the whole test flight environment. If you're going to build an iOS app, here's a way you can install it and test it out on some phones before it's in the App Store. Other companies like Facebook, they actually have a whole set of applications they use just for their employees, ways that they can get company updates. And I think one of the examples I saw was that they have a special app that shows the menu in their cafeteria each day. And they don't want that in the App Store because they don't want everybody to see Facebook's menu because, I don't know, security concern? I don't know, with supply chain attack? I don't know. But they want the employees to have access to it, so it's an app they can install. Well, those apps are fine as long as they're for internal corporate use. That's what Apple's Terms of Service, or TOS, says, right? So it has to be for internal use. Well, Facebook created an internal app that was designed to collect data from users. And they then proceeded to distribute that to non-employees, many of which were under 18 years of age. And so they were not of, I want to say consenting age, but they didn't have sex with the people. They just were collecting data, right?
As far as I know, I didn't read that part of the article.
Amazed what an app can do these days. So anyhow, they were collecting data, which was in violation of certain privacy laws. And so it violated Apple's TOS. So Apple yanked the enterprise certificate. And when they did that, it killed the app in question, but it also killed all of Facebook's other internal apps, which apparently has some of their employees a little upset, even though it's their own fault. So I don't necessarily understand where the anger is coming from.
Well, and there was something with Google as well with this, right?
Yeah, Google is basically doing the same thing here. We got TechCrunch, where Google will stop peddling a data collector through Apple's backdoor. The backdoor they're talking about is that enterprise security profile that you can generate, and it's not a big deal. Like I've done it with apps myself. Sometimes you want to compile something and try it out. You don't have the jailbreak, so it's pretty secure. And again, if you have a dev account, which I can't remember, it's $50 or $100.
It's $100.
It's $100.
Well, $99. Yeah.
All right.
So they kind of make you feel like you're paying a little less than
under $100.
Yeah.
And if you want to run unauthorized apps or whatever, you can build them yourself. So
within the rules.
Within the rules, yes.
Apparently.
So, and you can even break the rule. You can break the TOS all you want if it's just you using the app.
Right,
but when you distribute it to other people, that's when you become subject. There's actually, are you guys familiar with the emulator scene, like the Nintendo emulators and stuff? Obviously, those are not allowed in the iOS App Store, but there's a whole community. I think it's a website like build.io or something like that, where they actually, you install their enterprise cert and you can install these unauthorized emulators. I don't know how they do it and get around Apple's TOS because they're in blatant violation of it, but people do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. The crazy thing about the Facebook side of it and that application that you're talking about that they got in trouble for, that actually was available through the App Store at one point, and it got pulled by Apple. And so they tried to circumvent having to even deal with the App Store at all, and then they went this route. The crazier part to it is that they were actually paying people who signed up for the program $20 per month in order to be able to collect their data. So these people were actually making money off of it too, despite the non-acknowledgement that all of this data was going to Facebook. They thought, hey, quick and easy money, and if you're a kid, right? What easier way to get a little bit extra than your lunch money than to sign up for an app and just let it see what you do all day?
It's better than donating plasma. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Less painful, equally as invasive.
A lot less painful.
I think we're reaching a tipping point this year. I think 20 years from now, when we look back historically, these will be the years where we say, here's where data analytics and social media and all that reached the tipping point where people finally said, we're not willing to compromise all of our personal information.
Yeah, but what I find interesting, I started, and we can get into my background later, but I started off in web development, and we used a lot of the metrics and the data that Facebook collected back when I was doing that in like 2006, and this wasn't like news to anyone. We were able to gather this third-party information from Facebook easily. So what surprises me is how long it took for everyone in the general community to actually realize, oh my gosh, my privacy is not really private. Like, this data is out there. And I'm hearing all of the uproar, last year with Facebook going in front of, Congress and stuff, or I'm sorry, Zuckerberg was in front of Congress, trying to give that whole side of the story. And I'm like, people are freaking out about this now. It's been going on for years. Like, this isn't news to me or to us, but I guess, some people thought that the internet is safe. Let's go.
Well, I was talking to a marketer a few years ago, and they told me that part of the problem here is just the interpretation changed. And the example that they gave me was, they said, we wanted to make sure our advertising dollars were being maximized. We're getting the most out of it. So we looked at demographics, and we found that our product was most successful with white males between 25 and 35. And so Facebook allowed them to target ads to white males between 25 and 35. Well, one interpretation of that is, oh, look, you're getting the most out of your marketing dollars by targeting the most effective audience. The other angle of looking at it was you're discriminating against women and African Americans, right? Which is accurate. But by not even bothering to show those groups your advertisement, you're effectively taking them out of that purchaser pool. So I think data is just data. Data is not guilty or innocent, right? But how we use the data can actually be guilty and innocent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Marketers are the worst, right?
I hate marketers. Yeah. Especially you, Peter. I mean, if I had to do rankings.
Yeah, if they're top 5, I would. Okay, I appreciate that. Well, let's go over to our next article here, which I can't even see the headline to because of my ad blocker. Okay, now it's on. Fantastic. This one's on PCGamer.com. Intel launches its most powerful processor to date with 28 unlocked cores. And as a marketer, I don't know what that means, but 28 unlocked cores, that's a lot.
Well, at a minimum, that 28 cores is better than 27 cores, right?
Yeah.
So
it's one more.
Marketers can count. That's
Yes.
28 cores in a CPU is pretty darn impressive, right? Your average laptop or desktop these days is going to have a 4-core, maybe a 6-core processor. If you pony up a little extra dough, maybe an 8-core processor. As far as consumer and even business desktops and laptops, that's pretty much where you're going to cap out. So 28 cores, that's a lot, right? And we also have to remember that with Intel, they do hyper-threading, where sometimes you're not fully utilizing a core, so you can actually get the core to do 2 things at once, which means in certain workloads, this could be the equivalent of having up to 56 cores all on a single die. That's a lot of simultaneous work getting done.
Yeah, I don't even know what you could do with that. I mean, games it comes to mind immediately. You know, video games and rendering the new render engines that are going to require a lot of that. But I don't know. Other than that, I mean, I guess maybe mining Bitcoin or something like that.
That's where I always go.
Pull it from the forget the GPU power. Like we've got Intel now that's helping.
Yeah. Well, you know, the GPUs have largely taken over a lot of this role. And on the GPUs, you have the CUDA cores, and some of those will have thousands of CUDA cores inside of a GPU. So then all of a sudden 28 is not all that impressive. But when we're talking about things like video encoding and decoding, those will max out your CPU to 100% and run it. And the more cores you have, the better. So if I could be encoding 28 frames simultaneously, that's going to be a heck of a lot faster than encoding 4 frames simultaneously. So you can get a lot done faster. And that's powerful stuff. These processors, it's not going to be something that we have next year or even the year after, unless you're really rich. I think the MSRP listed here was $2,999, so a cool $3,000 for one of these CPUs. It has a base frequency of 3.1 gigahertz, turbos at 4.3 gigahertz. So this is a fast one. You know, the name for it, it's classed as a Xeon chip. Where's the name here? Xeon W-3175X. So I thought it was going to be an i9, but it's not. It's just it's Xeon class, so it's intended for servers, but this stuff makes it down into the desktops over time.
And I should clarify on that pricing for anyone running out to Amazon right now, that's for a bulk tray of 1,000.
Right, not 3,000 for the tray. It would be 3,000 per CPU.
No, I'm saying so you've got to buy 1,000 of these to get that level of pricing.
What is the?
Otherwise,
Jeez, you aren't kidding us.
Just add 3 zeros. It should be 2.9
million. So for $3 million, you can buy a tray right now.
Yeah, but then you can sell them to your friends for I don't know, 3,500 each.
Oh yeah, at least
that doesn't even that's not even the heat sink that would be required for pulling all of the heat it produces off of it. You know, I mean. I imagine at that point you're looking at liquid cooling for your CPU as well as your GPUs. You know,
I wonder when they have a high transistor density like this. A lot of times when they generate a tray, there's up to like a 20% failure rate. And
oh my gosh,
so
could you imagine?
When they say here 28 unlocked cores, a lot of times they'll make processors and they'll have more cores, but they're unstable due to transistor failure, and so they'll lock those off and or just block them out so they don't even show up. So that 6-core processor you have might actually have 8 cores, but 2 are dead.
Oh wow!
And GPUs do this all the time because of the amount of cores they have. So I wonder if you buy a tray of 1,000, are you getting some of the dead ones, or is this 1,000 like valid?
I would hope so for $3,000 a pop.
I have no idea. I mean, something cutting edge like this, maybe people just plan on that.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
One of these days.
So this is more for PC. This is for in a PC is what this is for. Not
Xeon class is normally targeted to servers. And I mean we've got some Xeon equipment in the back room here, but like in our desktops, we'll usually see the i5s, i7s, maybe i3s on the lower end stuff, and the i9s are the newer stuff. So Xeons though, that's typically server side. Usually has more L2 and L3 cache on board and a smaller die set. There's a few different things that kind of separate it. But that technology always makes the leap over to the desktop, and we'll have it on the desktop. In the Windows and Linux world, you'll have it on the desktop usually in 2 to 3 years. If you're in Apple, it'll probably be 5 years.
And we talked about gaming. I mean, is this something we could see in consoles or?
Maybe, you know, when it comes to gaming, GPU is really where your most of your work is being done.
Well, not only that, but you know, you can only make the picture look as good as the TVs that are presenting it to you. So they're kind of, you know, I think that gaming systems today could be a lot more powerful, but they're limited to what our actual output can be from our TVs. You know, we need to get that to catch up first before we can start looking at 28 cores. But like cloud providers would benefit greatly from having this amount of cores because, you know, they constantly have, in these cloud native environments, they don't have any idea of the load that is going to be needed at any one time. It could scale out and then immediately scale back down. And so having something like this probably would make the infrastructure guys, that are doing the engineering in these cloud data centers, make their jobs a lot easier, not have to worry about it so much and stuff. So I see maybe them making a play for it first before it actually makes it to consumers.
Yeah, that would be a really good deployment model, because if somebody spins up a VM with 4 vCPUs and they start Bitcoin mining, they're going to peg those out, but there's still 24 more cores sitting right there ready to go.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely something we'll keep an eye on and see what those use cases are as they come out. But let's switch to our next article now over at techrepublic.com. Think you can run Kubernetes better than a cloud provider? I don't. Think again.
Which means you can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Too many companies are reinventing the wheels, but or they're building out infrastructure that public clouds do so well. So this, is this news, or this is more an opinion piece on why it's better to run this in the cloud?
So this is a op-ed piece that came out of Tech Republic. We don't normally report on these, but I thought it was a pretty neat topic I wanted to touch on here, especially with a guest in the studio. There's this debate right now that, do we move all of our infrastructure into the cloud, or do we try and maintain our own infrastructure, or do we go hybrid where we're kind of spread in between? Like, which is the best model for us? And I know I've said repeatedly, if you can, get as much into the cloud as you can, because it's so much more cost effective and robust, and the odds are they're going to do a better job than you are. Somebody like AWS, Amazon, they can hire the most talented people in the planet because they have billions of dollars.
Our dollars.
And
we're giving them.
Well, portions of it, yeah. So, but then you take any average enterprise or large business, medium business, you don't have the pick of the entire world to find the best talent. You've got to, you'll hire the best if you can find them, but that's a big challenge. So for companies like that, they usually benefit from moving into the cloud. But that doesn't mean you can't deploy on premises. It's just there's a lot of things people don't think about. Anybody can stand up a VMware box and have automated virtual machine deployment with a portal to manage it. Anybody can stand up Hyper-V with a virtual machine manager portal and create their own AWS if they want, right? But you've got all the other infrastructure that goes behind it, the air conditioning systems, the generators, the building security, the hardware maintenance and warranties, the all of the other security that goes around it, and having a network operations center monitoring it 24/7. Well, there's some enterprises out there that have everything I just named. But I can guarantee you, like ITProTV, we don't have all that, right? We don't have giant diesel generators outside our building. And so for us, by having our stuff in the cloud, we don't need that. We let somebody else worry about it. They'll do a better job than we will.
Yeah, I remember they took those when we moved into the building.
They did.
They were out there.
Back there.
This used to be a Verizon
Yep.
knock. So, they had... We're like, oh, wow, we've got all these generators and stuff back here. And then moving day, the generators are all gone. Dang it.
Which I'm kind of glad, because you have to maintain them, right? You got to run the diesel generators once a week and cycle through fuel. And we're not going to do that. We've got other things to worry about. We got to create,
amazing
life-changing content like this podcast.
We've got to touch the lives of tens of tens.
Not only that, but you have to think, if you think of it from like a security perspective, which is immediately where my mind always goes. You made a lot of good points from, the physical, money that would be spent for the data center, right? And the upkeep there and the resources, et cetera. But from the security side of things, you have this problem of, when it comes to VMware, right? We can easily expand out or plan for the largest load of the year. So like if we're talking about retail, or maybe even you guys, Black Friday deals, Cyber Monday, that typically tends to be where the biggest load is. So you either plan your VMs in your guys' situation without any automation, you plan your VMs for that one day and you're paying all of that. But you also have to think about, well, let's say I do have that automation in place. Well, now I have to automate my security that goes along with that too, because what am I going to do? Just spin up extra VMs and not take care of that root account or that private key or that administrator account. So there's a lot more to it than just that. Whereas if we're talking about specifically Kubernetes and whether it would be better to just run it here or run it in a cloud provider, the benefit to running it in a cloud provider is that most cloud providers today, AWS, Azure, others, have basically said to the consumer who would be using their service, look, from the hypervisor level down, we'll take care of that security. But from your guys' perspective, running VMware or running Kubernetes on a VM or something like that internally, now you have to worry about that hypervisor level down. You have to deal with the security from that end. And to be able to not have to deal with the resources, but also not have to deal with the security from the hypervisor down is a good play. Kubernetes also falls into that same category that you were talking about earlier with MongoDB, where it just comes and in the README it says, don't use it in this state. Like, you need to think about security first. Kubernetes is the same way, although they don't make it as apparent. It's very unlocked in its nature when you initially deploy it. And it takes some time and some security knowledge of what's going on in Kubernetes to really get the role-based access controls in place, get it locked down. If you're not even looking at a product like Red Hat's OpenShift that brings all of this out of the box, like if you were to deploy Kubernetes and OpenShift side by side, OpenShift has already thought about the security, and it's a lot harder to deal with than Kubernetes, which is inherently open and ready to go. So I think that the cloud providers being able to handle that security, taking the onus off of a lot of these medium-sized businesses, or not like these large enterprises, right, who have the resources to throw at it, really makes the cloud provider the best place to go and sit. You think of it kind of like a SaaS product more so than like, I need to build this application and host it myself, you know?
Yeah, and it was just a few weeks ago we were covering announcements that came out of the big Amazon conference, and they had announced the AWS Outposts, right? Where you run on-premises servers, but it's running the Amazon software stack on there, so you can manage it right alongside your AWS assets. Doing things like that helps to push some of that responsibility back off onto that cloud provider. Right. So you end up with the best of both worlds. You have on-prem, but you also have remote management through a cloud provider.
Yeah, I don't see any situation where anyone is ever not going to be in a hybrid situation from an environmental perspective. There are legacy applications, there are mainframes in large enterprises. These things have a very, very, very like, if it's not broke, don't fix it type mentality to it, because it's the backbone of these enterprises for, 30 plus years that these mainframes have been around. And so to think that you're going to go all cloud native and in certain circumstances, industries, maybe that is good. Technology is one of them. That can happen. But financial institutions, big banks, things like that, never going to see that. I've seen financial institutions go to the ends of the world to make sure that their mainframe does not die, like when they're relocating it and stuff, renting cargo jets and stuff to load them onto, right? Like crazy stuff. So I don't think that we'll ever see a truly holistic cloud scenario from all enterprises. It'll always be somewhat hybrid to some extent, and we still have the endpoints on premise to worry about too that can hash cache keys, credentials, things like that still need to be protected. So especially from a privileged access perspective, it'll always be a hybrid scenario where we're talking about everything all the time.
So it sounds like 3 votes for cloud.
Yes.
And with the author, that's 4. So
there we go.
There you go.
We're unanimous. Perfect.
Unless you have like a Z series mainframe.
There you go.
I do not. All right, let's go to our next story. Got just a couple more here. This one on ZDNet. Microsoft guy. Is that just a guy at Microsoft, or is there a guy named Microsoft guy?
That's their secret mascot. They actually do name the guy in the article, but not in the headline.
So a Microsoft guy says Mozilla should give up on Firefox and go with Chromium too. So, it looks like everyone wants to move over to Chromium these days.
Yeah, this is a bit of a clickbaity headline because they're not saying give up on Firefox and dump the browser. They're saying the rendering engine that's behind it. So about a month ago, Microsoft announced that Microsoft Edge would be moving to using the same rendering engine from Chromium, which is what Google Chrome uses, and several other browsers like Vivaldi and so on are all using that now. Leaving Firefox is one of the only web browsers to have its own rendering engine. And so this one Microsoft employee who is one of the Microsoft program managers, basically came out and said that Mozilla should make the same change. They should give up on their own rendering engine because it makes it harder for web designers that when they create a web page, they have to make it where it's compatible with all these different rendering engines. So what he said was, and this is the quote, thought, "It's time for Mozilla to get down from their philosophical ivory tower. The web is dominated by Chromium. If they really cared about the web, they would be contributing instead of building a parallel universe that's used by less than 5%, with a question mark, which is not really a question, but the question mark's there. So, So there we go. This guy was Kenneth Ockenberg, who works on the Microsoft Visual Studio Code project.
I like that. He's saying, hey, get off your ivory tower like we did like a week ago.
Yeah. I know. Yes, exactly. Good point.
You could argue this is their new ivory tower.
Yeah. Get on this tower with us.
It sounds to me like he's trying to make his job easier since he develops web developer tools for Microsoft Visual
true.
Studio Code. It's like, man, why do I got to keep doing this for Firefox? They need to get on board. My job needs to get easier.
And it certainly would. Mozilla has positioned themselves as the guardians of the internet. They're trying to preserve free speech and free use of the internet, and a lot of their projects are targeted on that. Their argument is that having their own web rendering engine is part of what keeps them free from these other projects. So there's certainly an argument there. I don't know the right answer on this one. Personally, I use Chrome, so I've already been kind of indoctrinated into that. But I see the value of other rendering engines.
I bet that the rendering techniques that they put into their the quantum browser, like we were talking earlier, it's got to be something with that. Like maybe they put so much work into that, what they've got in quantum, to where they just can't even think about WebKit right now. It's like, let's just prove this out first, and then maybe we'll look at WebKit or something. But it would be nice if they did.
So, all right. So Edge is moving away from the Edge HTML rendering engine to Chromium. Firefox is on Gecko engine. Is it's Explorer on the same Edge HTML?
No, Explorer's on its own, which I can't remember the name of it, but Explorer's being end-of-lifed anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
We're not worrying about that one in terms of moving it over. Okay, Gotcha.
And Safari's on WebKit. Chromium is actually a fork of WebKit, so they're technically compatible.
Close. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, for the one person that uses Safari.
For that.
To download Chrome, right?
That's basically it.
Which is what you do with Explorer. Yeah.
Now, the sad part about all of this is it shouldn't matter. Like, if people would just make the web browser standards compliant, HTML5, HTML 1.1, there's standards that define this stuff. If everybody was standards compliant, this would be fine. But we have stuff like Google AMP that get in and mess with the standard and break it, and now the web browsers have to handle that, and you end up with these websites that render differently in different web browsers, and it's frustrating.
Well, it's a lot better than it used to be, when you used to have to deal with, a CSS file in 4 different types of browsers. And then there was also Opera thrown into the mix at one point, and all of these other third-party, like, offshoot browsers that you had to plan for the one-off chance that somebody came to your site and it didn't render properly. So just dealing with 2, it seems a lot better than dealing with 4 or 5 or 6.
And there were weird things, like, if I remember right, I think it was Internet Explorer that could handle up to 11 style sheets, but if you had 12 style sheets, it just stopped loading, and then other browsers used more and less. So, that kind of stuff should be standardized. It isn't, and so we end up with this little playground battle here between the web browsers.
Yeah, Mozilla's CEO said at the time that Microsoft made their decision that the move will give Google more power to single-handedly determine how people use the web.
Yeah, but I can see that.
So we should give them all the power.
Well,
I just love people in different ivory towers fighting. That's just, it's like watching the Fire Festival documentaries beforehand. It's just, go on. What were you saying from your other ivory tower? All right, last article here, back to Microsoft's tower. This one is on techcommunity.microsoft.com. Bringing Internet Explorer 11 to Windows Server 2012 and Windows Embedded 8 standard. I thought we were getting rid of Explorer, Don. You just said that.
So we are, right? Internet Explorer 11 is the last version of Internet Explorer. There won't be a version 12. And, they're pushing Microsoft Edge for that. Well, Internet Explorer 10 is being end-of-lifed the hard way. Microsoft did this thing where they say, we're not going to support it anymore, but we can do paid updates. But they're ending everything in 2020. Actually, I think it's in January of 2020, which is only 11 months away. And most of you are probably thinking, well, who cares? You just upgrade to IE 11. Well, if you're running Windows Server 2012, the default web browser was IE 10, and there wasn't a version of IE 11 that you can install. So they have finally released a version of IE 11 that will run on Windows Server 2012, as well as Windows 8 Embedded Edition, which I was going to make a joke about nobody using until I found a device here in the building that actually used it. Ooh. So, it does turn up from time to time.
What was it? Let the hackers know.
It was a time clock.
Oh,
so, yeah.
That's right.
So you end up with these devices and you don't even think about it. But basically, there wasn't an option. And so people with these types of devices or servers really are worried about that. Like, hey, you're end-of-lifing this web browser. It's installed on my server. I can't uninstall it. Yeah. And there's no updated version. So they have basically dealt with that now. They've released an update so you can push that out, get IE 11 on there. Windows Server 2012 is end of lifing. Actually, I think it's already end of life. It's Windows Server 2012 R2 that's still under support. So hopefully you don't have a lot of those deployed, but I know even as I say those words, many people still have Windows Server 2012 R2 in production.
And this is important because most people do most of their web browsing on their servers.
Oh, of course.
Absolutely. I know I do all the time.
Yeah, because I don't want to get like spyware on my laptop, so I remote into a server and browse the web that way.
I want to get the spyware at the source. All right. Well, fantastic. That's really it for the news this week. It's another week where we walk away just depressed, I feel like. I mean, the last stuff, sure, that's great.
Hey, 28 cores, right? We can
28 cores. We're
drop
going
our
to bank
anchor on that
that
one.
Yeah, but you even told me that there might be even more cores and they just don't even work.
Yeah.
That's
But you get 28.
Yeah. You know, when you said that, it made me wonder, like, if they do actually work, but they're there and just dormant, is there a way to, like, unlock them and check it?
So with ATI video cards, there was a group that started putting out custom firmware. You could flash in there to try and unlock the extra cores. And sometimes what they would find is they had an 8-core board with one bad core. So it was then, or I think they were called pipelines. So there'd be 8 pipelines. One was bad, and so they throttled it down to 6. So there was still a 7th one there you could recover, and so they actually found where you could unlock it. I've never seen that with an actual CPU, but in graphics cards, I know it's been done.
That's maybe somebody will get smart and apply it to the CPUs.
All right. Well, like I said, that's it for the news, but we do want to talk to Joe a little bit more about CyberArk, but we're going to do that after a quick break, stretch your legs, pop some more popcorn.
Yeah.
But we'll be back right after this with more on Technado.
I'm James Packer. I'm the General Manager of Kirk ISS based in the Cayman Islands. I used ITProTV extensively in my last place. It grew very well, helped upskill the team. I had 110 engineers in the field and we had dozens of IT Pro accounts with the guys training, and last year alone they passed over 40 certs by using the online training. I think I can safely say without ITProTV I wouldn't be where I was today because I only got this job on the back of the qualifications I have.
And welcome back to Technado. And so let's go ahead and get into this and find out a little bit more about CyberArk. But first, you mentioned a couple times your background, web development, stuff like that.
Right.
So I'd like to kind of before we talk about CyberArk and what you're doing there, let's talk about your journey because as an IT training company with ITProTV, we're always curious to kind of find out the path that people take to get to where they are.
It was a crazy one. So I started off in web development, dealing with HTML, CSS, PHP, MySQL, JavaScript. Started off doing that right out of high school, actually. So I got right started into what I wanted to do out of high school and did that for about 5-6 years. I did it for a company that I actually started up with one of my friends that is now based out of Chicago called Dreamco Design. And also for a local radio show in Tampa, did web development for them as well as, some on-air stuff. From there, though, I went and decided that, from a graphic design, web developer type angle, which I did all of that, it was so oversaturated at the time. This was around like 2008 or so. And it was so oversaturated by freelancers and people who were just like picking it up and running with it that I was like, okay, it's time for a change. Let me get into technical support, right? And we'll start working up the IT chain. A little backstory was that, growing up, I always wanted to be a lawyer. But I always said, like, if I could ever be like a computer cop, I would do that, right? So I didn't know there would be a name for it eventually, but it was something that I had always, so I decided, let me get into IT and see where that takes me. And I started doing consulting work for nonprofits in the Tampa area, subsidiaries, or not subsidiaries, but like subcontractors of the Department of Children and Families around Hillsborough County. Did that at a couple different places where I ended up managing the technical support there. That really was where I learned a lot, to be honest with you, because the nonprofit, not a lot of money. So you really had to be like a jack of all trades and really think like MacGyver, take this, bubble gum over here and this floss over here and make something work in the server room or something. you had to wear multiple hats. So that really got me my sysadmin experience, dealing with Active Directory. I had control over that, creating the users, Exchange, Bez. It was back when BlackBerries were big, right? So we had a BlackBerry Enterprise server for mail. And then from there, kind of like the pinnacle of any IT career in Tampa, everybody looks at Raymond James Financial as that go-to place to go and work for. So I interviewed there for their identity and access management team, and ended up getting the job based on the fact that I had ran a PowerShell command before. And I guess they heard that I was into automation, but I had the developer background, wasn't scared, accepted it, and began on a journey of automating their identity and access management team. They were doing a lot of easily repeatable tasks that they just shouldn't have been doing over and over again, and they weren't being able to actually analyze any of the incidents that were coming in. So I worked for a couple years in that department, basically automating using PowerShell all of their repeatable tasks, dealing with CyberArk, for example, and automating with CyberArk. So I was a customer before I even went to CyberArk. So ended up going on to security operations from there, doing the same thing there. And then working with CyberArk so closely, I became to fall in love with it, get to know the people who were our representatives from CyberArk. We all just really, we're in sync, and the culture and everything that I always heard about was something that, I wanted to give a shot. So I sent off my resume and a shot in the dark one day, and they called me up literally the morning of the next day and was like, let's talk, let's do this. So I joined their customer success team in 2016 because I was a customer, and they figured that experience would equate easily. So I just started helping customers who had already purchased one of our products just get it up and running and kind of understand, what do I do with this thing? You know what I mean? And did that, and then was lucky enough after we acquired one of our newer products called Conjur, which does secrets management for us. I was lucky enough to be one of the first people who had a dev background, work for CyberArk, to actually touch it. I was at ChefConf actually when we acquired them, and ended up having to start pitching it at the booth the day that we acquired them. And I'm like, I just learned Docker a week ago. I have no clue what this means, but you got to start somewhere, and it was definitely trial by fire. And so
fortunately, nobody expects a conference booth rep to know what they're talking about. So
I know. I know. Yeah, I did get away a lot. Well, the good news about DevOps that a lot of people don't understand is that we're all learning. Everything is changing so fast and every day that I couldn't tell you what is going on between Kubernetes and Jenkins today. I'd have to go look and see, what's going on. Well, I know Jenkins X, but just things like that. You have to really have a willingness to learn and a passion for it to stay on top of it, to stay relevant, really, and it's just, something that I love to do. And I really feel that the methodology, the DevOps methodology is really sound. It's worked for developers. It's worked for operators. We just got to give security that little push to catch on up with DevOps and not always have them feeling like, oh, here comes security. What are we going to do? We're not trying to be the bad guys in the room or anything like that. We want to learn. We want to catch up. We want to be as fast as you guys. But trying to break down that wall is really what I'm trying to do with my position there.
Now you mentioned Conjur, and when I think of CyberArk, Conjur is the product that I think of, which is funny because you guys acquired them, so you have a whole line of business I want to talk about. Well, let's start with that. So can you give our viewers a better understanding of what that Conjur product is and what it does? Sure.
Yeah. So Conjur we did acquire back in I believe 2017, around the April timeframe. And it is essentially a dynamic access provider that we now utilize in order to extend our current enterprise password vault into DevOps pipelines, CI/CD pipelines, the cloud. It's very cloud agnostic in that sense. And we've really refocused what we do to become more inclusive. So we can have a conversation around just cloud specifically, but we would be ignoring the fact that we still have an on-premise situation that we need to look at. And CyberArk is really one of those solutions that can really protect people from mainframe to cloud and do it in a way that makes sense. From Conjur's perspective, it's delivered as a Docker container, which gives us a lot of benefits. It's highly elastic. If we put it into AWS, for example, we can put auto scaling around it and have our containers scale out, scale back in, be able to handle that. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create an authorization engine that we can authorize non-human entities, machines, microservices, VMs, containers, things that don't last but for milliseconds, give them an identity that they can use in order to for us to be able to have a chain of custody on the credentials for auditing purposes, centralize that audit, centralize the secrets management. Today we've created so many security islands in our pipelines. I mean, it's great that Jenkins has a credential plugin. It's great that Ansible has their tower credentials that you can deal with stuff in, but they're not talking to each other. And if you rotate it in one place, nothing else is going to know about that. And finally, your auditors are either going to have to figure out how to maneuver an elk stack in order to find all of the information they need to report on what's going on, or you could use a product such as our Conjur that extends everything into there, and we centralize all of that for you and allow you to start now rotating secrets, not just keeping them static in this code. Maybe they're encrypted or whatever. It gives us a lot of power.
So when you mentioned non-human entities, I just immediately thought aliens, which is really forward thinking. But but let me give you a scenario and help me understand how Conjur would fit in this picture. So let's say that I have an automated report that's generated and it's dumped off into some storage, and I need an outside vendor to access that. And so I hand them some. In the past, I might stand up an SFTP. Like a secure FTP connection, and give them some SSH credentials so that they could then log in and access that report. And because it was a manual handoff of credentials, I obviously don't want to cycle the password, because then I've got to be able to send them new credentials and so on. So in a really simple environment like that, how would Conjur snap in to assist?
So I don't know that would necessarily be something that we would even look into Conjur for, because now we're talking about privileged access into something, right? So we have a privileged session manager that we can utilize in order to not have to disclose any of the actual SFTP credentials or the SCP credentials or whatever it is you're using. We can mask those and then use the user's ID logging into our solution as that authorization piece. So we'll check and make sure, do they have access to even use these credentials? Okay, they do. All right, look, we'll take care of the connection for you so that you don't have access to the credentials. If we rotate them in the background, doesn't matter because we manage the credentials anyways, right? So now you have active rotation on them.
That's like a proxy, or?
So yeah, kind of like a proxy, more like a jump host, I would say. Okay. But it's hardened utilizing our technology that we use in order to harden our secure digital vault. So it's something that we've been doing for about 20 years now. But by doing that, we can apply other factors to it. By having control of that jump host, we can put on top of it recording capabilities, whether that is keystroke logging, Windows session audit in Windows, and knowing what windows are opening. And then we have an analytics engine as well in our suite that we can now start to take actual remediation on things as we see them. So if we see somebody who's connecting to that SFTP server outside of the hours of 8 to 5 when it's usually accessed, maybe it's happening at 2 a.m. and it's the wrong password and it happens 5 times in a row or something like that, our analytics engine will pick up on that and immediately rotate the password in case that it was, like there was actual credential theft occurring. That person shouldn't know the credentials that much to be able to use the wrong password. We have them vaulted. We manage them. We can see what's going on, whether that's by ingesting SIM logs or just by seeing what's going on in our own environment and make correlations based on that using baseline analytics.
Sounds very helpful for the Kremlin's admin account.
Yeah, that's a good point. So my scenario wasn't a good fit for Conjur. It was a better fit for your other product. What was that called?
So that other product is our privileged session manager. It's part of our core privileged access security offering.
Okay. So what would be a practical example where Conjur would be a good fit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, Conjur comes into play when we're dealing with applications who are either containerized or a microservice or living in the cloud somewhere that need access to a token or an API key or something like that. For example, we typically see Conjur utilized in the CI/CD pipelines a lot, where Jenkins needs access to GitHub credentials in order to pull down source code so that it can build something, and then it's going to want to test it. Well, each one of these things that Jenkins touches needs some sort of secret or credential in order for it to happen. So what Conjur can do is sit near where Jenkins lives as that container, and then Jenkins will start to use it as a service in order to get the secrets as it needs it. And the benefits with that is that we can now have a container next to Jenkins. So if you happen to have a huge release that's coming out tomorrow and you have a lot of testing that needs to go through, we'll just scale out to be able to serve all the secrets without breaking your pipeline for the time that it needs that amount of resources. And then, like we were talking about earlier, nobody wants to pay for stuff that they don't need to use. We can scale it back down from there and bring it back down to a normal flow and be able to do that, almost instantaneously as that load increases and follow along with it.
All right. Now, you also mentioned endpoints earlier,
Sure.
right? And so we've kind of been talking about services, or I gave an example of
Yeah.
sharing credentials to some automated thing. But what are you guys doing for endpoints?
Yeah, so as far as endpoints are concerned, we have an endpoint privilege manager, which is essentially it's an agent that would run on either Windows or Mac, and it takes whitelisting and blacklisting as you'd expect from an endpoint security product, but it injects an additional little flavor into it called gray listing. And what the gray listing allows you to do is say, for example, you have your blacklist, you have your whitelist of applications that can run, that can't run. And we say, look, if we haven't already defined this application as something that can or can't run, let's make sure it doesn't have access to the intranet, so if it's ransomware, it can't get that encryption key, it can't encrypt anything on the intranet. Let's try and confine it until we make a decision based on the signing of it or what it actually is, whether we want to allow it to enter our environment or not. But along with that, we also find that there are a lot of credentials that people will use in order to remote desktop connect to servers. Well, anytime you do that, you're leaving behind a hash of that username and password, and the same with SSH, right? You're leaving behind the key that's cached. If people go to CyberArk.com right now, we have a tool out there, it's free to use, called Discovery and Audit, and they can really just run it either on their local computer or on their network if they have access to Active Directory for reading what machines are out there, and it will start to create a pass the hash map, look for any SSH keys. And people sometimes, I feel, think that, hey, there's nothing to worry about on the endpoint because that's not where I'm keeping my secrets anyways. They're locked away in the vault, when they're not aware that there are still other ways that the endpoint can be infiltrated and then used against you for lateral movement and finding a way to get to that admin. So I may not have that admin access, but my credential may have access to something else where they can start to harvest more and more of those credential hashes and make their way to domain admin.
So it's pretty neat. I know when I think about a lot of credential management, I always think about when I'm sharing credentials with people outside of the organization. But you bring up a great point that really inside of your organization, it's just as sensitive, if not more so, because these are people that you're allowing access behind your firewall. So, and firewalls aren't perfect either. So.
Right. No, but I mean, and that's another point. And that's why CyberArk always assumes breach. Like, we assume breach because, we don't want to rely always on the firewalls, but we tend to forget and trust our employees too much too. And not to say that every employee out there is a bad actor of any kind, but you kind of want to prepare yourself for any angle of attack. And if you are just assuming that our employees are good, they use CyberArk and they don't use Excel to save their passwords and stuff, that's just one little portion of it. If you guys have source control management in your organization, sometimes all it takes is just a developer taking a snippet of code that he needs help with and putting it up on Stack Overflow, and it's got a hard-coded secret in it right there. So there's other things to think about from an internal perspective, whether they're malicious or not.
I was going to say, so we got the website, CyberArk.com.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that people should check out if they want to learn more about you guys?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we've got so many great resources up there on CyberArk.com. We have a CISO view that we just released, which goes a lot more into detail from a CISO level as to DevOps security, the digital transformation, how to handle that, how to approach security, and what to start looking for this year. It's available out there. We also have our own CyberArk Labs group, which is really cool. They're my favorite. They write a lot of blog posts, and their whole idea is that, look, we are going to start from a post-breach perspective and show you what you can do in order to identify weaknesses in your architecture and prevent lateral movement by exploiting things. They just had the six in a 6-part series of basically breaking down Jenkins credentials plugin and the different ways that Jenkins can be misconfigured in a common scenario and how that can actually unlock way too much information from your environment and just invite attackers to walk in. And then finally, of course, Conjur we talked about and we touched on. It is open source now. I don't know that it was when we discussed it back in Black Hat 2017. No, yes, we do have an open source version now, which all of our integrations, which are built for Conjur through our C-Cubed Alliance, is available to work on that open source version, and you can find it at conjur.org.
Yeah, and I saw it here too. It's just all up on GitHub, so you can.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, it's up on GitHub. We're available in the Google Cloud Marketplace for a one-click install into GCP. We're up in the AWS Marketplace, so you can find us almost anywhere. And if any vendors that you have, if you search for CyberArk or even go to our own marketplace at cyberark.com/marketplace, you can see all of it. It's over 100 different vendors that we're able to integrate with today.
And I was just looking too at RSA coming up in about a month now, and so you guys are going to be there. We're going to be there.
I just started signing up for parties today. Been getting them
you're
VIP party invites. Yeah,
well,
it's RSA.
Forward those along to me.
Absolutely,
that would be appreciated. And I do have to man the booth in the morning, but
I'll be on the booth too.
Yeah, that's fun. Comfortable shoes.
Early morning.
But you guys are more than welcome to visit me, and I'll show you what Conjur's up to now.
Yeah.
Because I know it's been a couple years, so
Yeah.
we got to get you guys by the booth and check out what we've got going on. We'll be there for sure. Always at RSA and all the big events.
Are there any big announcements coming up? Anything to keep an eye out for?
As far as announcements go, we do have one pretty big one. We talked a little bit about the Privileged Session Manager earlier. Well, we just announced that we're releasing our Privileged Session Manager for the cloud. So for those SaaS-based web apps for your cloud environments like AWS, Azure, and essentially what we can do there is now using the user's browser, be able to isolate their sessions to those applications, put monitoring in place, see what URL they're hitting, block them from accessing URLs. You don't want them in IAM for AWS. They don't have a reason to be there. We'll block it. And then on top of that, our analytics engine can also do the same type of remediation and detection that we can on those normal connections over RDP and SSH. We're taking a look at everything, auditing everything, and it really gives the auditors a full, complete picture of what the IT or business users are doing. Social media, that's a huge one, right? Marketing teams, multiple people and marketing teams needing access to a Facebook account or a Twitter account. Now you can share a shared account that's vaulted and managed by us with them to use, and then also have monitoring on top of what they're posting, so you have the confidence that your brand isn't going to get ruined, because that is a huge financial damage piece if that actually occurs.
And that's way better than the system most are using, which is a Post-it.
Yes,
most marketing teams.
The guys in Hawaii, right? The emergency commission. He had his password right on his monitor. I remember that.
It was in the background of that photo.
Yeah, the photo. Yeah, the photo up here. Here's my password.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks for having
me. For joining us, but for physically joining us today, and taking the time to come up. It was good to have you on the news section as well, and to get your take on that stuff. But we'll definitely keep an eye on CyberArk and make sure to have you on again when we've got new stuff to talk about. But,
Absolutely. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, before we let you go, I want to let you know about a couple of things coming up. First of all, some webinars. We actually just recorded a webinar today with Don and a special guest, Zach Hill from the YouTube channel IT Career Questions, about the 5 common questions for starting an IT career. So that's going to be up on the website very soon for those of you who missed it to go back and watch the archive. That's at ITPro.tv/webinars. And we've got some great webinars coming up in February as well that we're kind of firming up the details on. So you can check out that same website and find out information all about those and to sign up for them. Also want to let you know about an opportunity to find out more about ITProTV. If you head over to go.itpro.tv/Technado, you can find out about a 30% off code that you can use for your personal subscription. If you're on a team and you want to find out about some of the special deals that we have for teams, you can fill out a form there and get a demo as well. Find out about our Pro Portal and all the cool things that we're doing for teams as well. So check that out at go.itpro.tv/Technado. Well, again, thank you for coming up. Thank you, Don, for being in your office. Always good to have you here in your own office.
That's
so.
right. You know, it's a bit of a travel, but it's worth it to be on a prestigious show like this.
Yeah, you could Skype from your home, but you actually came into your office, so I appreciate that as well. And thank you all of you for joining us today, and we will see you next week right here on Technado.
Are you enjoying Technado? Then be sure to check out our other podcast, Ask Me Anything, where our subject matter experts answer your questions. Here's the latest episode, and here's the full playlist. And as always, be sure to subscribe to ITProTV's channel. ITProTV!